Paladin Unbound by Jeffrey Spate. Narrated by Adam Blandford. Prologue. And from the age of chaos arose a true king of men who restored order to Evelium. The Gatekeeper's Abridged History of Tiberial, Volume 2, Chapter 34. Unearthed from the ruins of Meriden, the month of Aachen, 1240 A.T. The demon god staggered through the dense woods, his form much diminished, his power drained after a century-long battle. His legions destroyed, he sensed the others hidden in the woods. Those he had so fully betrayed were closing in. There was yet one chance at salvation, albeit a despairing one. Dropping to his knees, he broke the soil, tearing at root and rock, his claws splintering. His amethyst-colored skin was singed and torn, and one of his gnarled horns was broken off at its base. His hunched posture was reminiscent more of a feral beast than an esteemed god of Tiberial. Stretching his sinuous arms deep into the hole, he closed his vermilion eyes and murmured an incantation in a dying tongue into the rich earth. His failure ensured the language would soon be forgotten in all but the deepest recesses of the realm that should have been his alone. Within the hole, a red glow emanated from his hands, the ether slipping between his aching claws. As the radiance dissipated, a slab of pure rhodium materialized. Upon the metal slab he had engraved runes in the language of the gods. "From Pragaris I shall return, and all of Evelium shall burn. The blood of 12,000 souls ensnared. Only the loyal few be spared. I shall ascend to my rightful place, delivering our world from its fall from grace. To thee who delivers me from hell, your eternal thirst I shall quell." In a frenzy, he buried the tablet and pried a large boulder from the earth beside him, capping his treasure. His inevitable salvation now secured, he stood and pressed on through the lush woods, tree limb after tree limb lashing him as he ran. "Nor!" A woman's voice seethed from the edge of the clearing through which he clambered. "This must end now, brother!" Vela emerged from the shade of the tree line, her graceful form glowing in the early morning sun. Black hair draped flawlessly across the light blue skin of her shoulders, her gown radiating celestial energy of its own. She carried a great sword in each hand, their hilts fashioned into angels with outstretched wings extending up the base of the gleaming blades. She strode forward. Two more gods, one with a body of stone and the head of a great elk, the other a midnight blue winged serpent, approaching Nor from behind. "Vela, you do not realize how completely you have failed this world," Nor said, holding his fists out before him and summoning a flaming battle axe in each. His brothers behind him dropped into a defensive crouch, but Vela continued forward, undeterred. "Instead of embracing their flaws and appealing to their strengths, you strive to control the mortal races and sculpt them into something they are not. I wish only to allow them to be themselves and fulfill our promise to them." "You seek total dominion, Nor," Vela said. "Don't fool yourself into thinking your actions have come with their best interests at heart, that you fight us out of altruism. You don't care for the mortals. Instead, you would exploit their greatest weakness, so you alone can rule over them for eternity. Your game ends now, brother, but only you can determine how. Whether it be in your death or your banishment to Pragaris makes no difference to us." Her words urged Brinthor and Kemen forward. Nor glanced back at his brothers and sneered. His lips curling, venom dripped from a mouthful of fangs down his chin. Brinthor and Kemen dismissed the poisonous warning and closed in on their brother's flank. Nor spun and embedded both of his axes into Brinthor's lithe form. The great winged serpent screeched in pain. As Brinthor recoiled, Vela plunged one of her swords into Nor's back, below his right shoulder blade. Without wincing, Nor turned toward Kemen and readied his next attack. Kemen stood his ground, his hands glowing red as though made of magma, flowing into the forms of two stone spikes. Nor tore his axes from Brinthor's body and lunged. Kemen parried Nor's attack with one of the spikes and thrust the other into Nor's abdomen. Kemen broke the extremity off within the wound, leaving himself temporarily hobbled. With this blow, Nor, the god of fire, fell to his knees and laughed, his lifeblood flowing to the forest floor, withering the flora beneath him. Vela stepped closer, now looming over him, her form blocking out the sun. He spat at her gown, covering her in blood and black venom, before her inner light once again shone through. "You have won," Nor said, his tone still growling with confrontation. "Do what you will with this failure of yours. Do what you will with me, your scourge." "End him," Kemen said. "He deserves worse, but death will rid us of his antics once and for all." Vela shook her head. Kemen rushed forward and thrust his remaining sharpened hand at Nor's head, but Vela raised her free hand and froze Kemen in place, the tip of his weapon inches from dealing a finishing blow. "No, Kemen. I cannot allow you to kill him," she said. "Nor, as punishment for your transgressions, your deceit, you shall be bound to Bragaris for all of eternity. There, you shall fester, knowing Tiveriel goes on without you. You shall be forgotten in the annals of history, relegated to the stature of a lesser deity, and then by only the most disparate recesses of the culture that flourishes in your absence." "Sister," Brinthor hissed, "as always, I appreciate your sense of loyalty and justice, but this time you go too far. An honorable death is more than we owe him, and the cost of binding him to Bragaris is too great. I understand the cost all too well. The time has come for us to leave this plane and allow our creation to build its own future, find its own path. We have wandered these lands since the dawn of time and waged war upon it for the last millennium. Tiveriel needs time to heal. It needs a new beginning. It no longer needs our interference." She paused. "Honestly, I am tired. This war has taken too much from me. We shall recede to the tranquility of Kalmandon and grant this realm its freedom." Vela finished speaking and thrust her second sword into Nor's chest, forming an inverted triangle with his other two wounds. She impelled the blade through him to its hilt, Nor's blood drenching the earth. Vela released her sword and Nor's back arched up toward the heavens in pain, his head bending backward until it touched the ground. The 3 wounds burned with a pure white light that grew in intensity, until climaxing at a level blinding to a mortal's eye. Beneath Nor, a great portal opened. Within the swirling vortex appeared the vision of an arid wasteland. He fought the power of the portal, forcing himself onto his hands and knees and peered into the abyss. Accepting his fate, his gaze darted to his sister, whose lips trembled as tears streaked her face. "Worry not, sister," he said, engulfed in the purple aura of the portal. "You only do what you think is right. You always do. Do not weep for me, and remember that, for immortals, even eternity is temporary. We shall see each other again." The portal collapsed inward upon itself with a blast of energy, taking Nor with it and leaving Vela, Kemen, and Brinthor alone in the quiet of the clearing. "Brothers, our war is over," Vela said, releasing Kemen from her spell. "We have saved Tiveriel, and now must turn our backs on it and return to Kalmandon." A tear, shimmering with the purity of a flawless diamond, ran down her face. Kemen fell to his knees and glared at Vela, anger swelling within him. "I choose to remain in Tiveriel," he said, pounding his spear-like hand into the ground. "I love this wild land too much to return to the sanctity of the heavens. Kalmandon, in all its perfection, holds no salvation for me." "I shall stay as well," Brinthor said, a sheepish expression coming over his face. This was one blow too many, and Vela cried freely. "Brothers, you know turning away from Kalmandon will strand you on this plane for all of eternity, but with only a remnant of your godly powers. I plead you reconsider, and join me in ascension." "We well know the price of our decision," Kemen said. He climbed to his feet and pointed his unbroken spike at Vela, shaking it in contempt. "You were the one who did not consider everything when you opted to spare Nor. Return to your heaven, your precious Kalmandan. We choose the mortal plane." "If this is your wish, I shall abide by it," Vela said. "Just know all I did was in my best judgment for us and Tiveriel. Harbor no ill will against me for my shortcomings. I hope you will miss me as much as I will miss my beloved brothers. Today, I've lost 3. We shall miss you, Vela. But this is where our paths diverge. Our best to you, sister," Kemen said, softening his tone. Vela shut her eyes and smoothed her long hair behind her shoulders. She placed her hands together and faded from sight. Their sister having returned to her endless paradise, Kemen and Brinthor shifted their physical forms. Kemen assumed the form of a majestic elk, and Brinthor changed into a blue dragon. They looked at one another, Kemen grunting, no longer able to communicate with his brother. Brinthor raised his head and released an earth-shattering roar. With 2 thrusts of his great reptilian wings, he lifted off the ground and disappeared into the cloud-filled sky. Kemen scratched the earth with his hoof and sniffed at the air. After a moment, he leaped into the forest and disappeared into the wilderness he so loved. Chapter 1. Upon Mount Orus, he declared his dominion over man and beast alike. The Gatekeeper's Abridged History of Tiveriel, Volume 3, Chapter 5, discovered in the private library of Solana Marwyn, the month of Vasa, 889 AT. Candlelit Tavern was a raucous watering hole on its best of nights, and this was not one of those. Umra the Peacebreaker slouched on a stool too small for his hulking form, fiddling with a blue velvet pouch he wore on his belt, as he watched his 5 comrades, members of his mercenary crew, the Bloodbound, celebrate their arrival in the city of Anaris. Having traveled from the town of Otera with hardly a rest, the Bloodbound was well into their 8th round of Barnswallow's Sowing Moon Ale, and had turned to intimidating and insulting the other patrons for drunken entertainment. Umra had too much on his mind to partake in such levity. His strong brow furrowed. There would be much competition in securing Lord Espen Morrow's contract, the Bloodbound's reason for the exhausting journey. Morrow's reputation was beyond reproach and could provide the much-needed work that his men, who did not share Umra's strong moral compass, needed. No doubt the odds of success were slim. Several groups of mercenaries had also descended upon the city, with similar aspirations of obtaining the contract, and each had the distinct advantage of not being half-orcs. Leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, a few strands of black hair fell from his unkempt ponytail and dangled in front of his face. He worried his lip around 2 oversized canine teeth protruding from his lower jaw, and his green-gray fingers ran over the rough surface of his tankard of beer. He surveyed the crowd. Umra dropped his head, stared at the floor, and considered how he'd make his case before Lord Morrow. His team marched for nearly a month in pursuit of this opportunity, and would, no doubt, be disappointed if all they had to show for their effort was the dried mud that cracked and crumbled from their leathers. The trip had been taxing, the Bloodbound having marched off the main roads to avoid human travelers and the King's Guard, who might object to a group of armed half-orcs and delay their arrival. Umra kept the bedlam his crew created at a distance, preferring to sit alone. Having spent all of his formative years at the Trinity Temple in Travesty, Umra was a quiet soul, more comfortable around monks and clerics than this drunken mob. Despite the distance between him and the fray, his heart raced and his throat closed. Groups of humans, Iminti and Zarastar, bantered loudly, their spirited conversation spilling over into occasional scuffles as they drank. His men reveled in the chaos, the crowd tolerating the half-orcs among them, an unusual act, but all the same, Umra's anxiety swelled. A man, roughly the size of an 8-year-old human child, danced on a nearby table. His brown tousled hair dripped with sweat, and his once properly fitted red velvet vest, white linen shirt, and natural leather pants were soaked through and too large on his gaunt frame. He danced with abandon, his ale splashing about the room. Umra smiled at how reckless and carefree the man jigged. The other patrons gathered around him, forgetting their petty squabbles, and clapped along with the music. The minstrel sped up as if proposing a challenge. Those surrounding the Forestier man roared with approval at the spontaneous entertainment. "All right, boys," Umra bellowed, rising from his stool against the wall. "It's time to turn in." "But Umra," his lieutenant, Drog the Mancleaver, protested, always the crew's best advocate. "After such a journey, surely you can grant the men a few more moments of levity." The plea still fresh in Umra's ears. Thurg the Ear-Splitter grabbed the Forestier man by the leg and tossed him across the room with a disapproving grunt. The music screeched to a halt, and the crowd turned its attention to the half-orcs. A group of battle-hardened Zarastar, short in stature but broad-shouldered, stood from their seats and stepped over the slight man who lay tangled beneath their table. "Oi, orc scum," the foremost of the Zarastar said, scratching his ginger beard with one hand and drawing a silver battle-axe over his shoulder with the other. "Is this how you pay us back for letting you stink up our tavern all night?" Thurg turned to the Zarastar and spit at his feet. "I think it best we go," Umra said, sliding past Drog and coming between Thurg and the flushed Zarastar. Umra held his arms out, one palm on Thurg's chest, the other facing the Zarastar. "Outside, now." Thurg swallowed the rest of his ale and slammed his tankard down on a nearby table. He shoved his way through the crowd, and the rest of the bloodbound followed. "He's obviously taken the liberty of one too many tonight," Umra said, shifting his attention to the Zarastar. "Please accept my apology." "Anaris has no use of your kind," the Zarastar said. "You'd be well advised not to cross our path again." Umra nodded, turned to the barkeep, and tossed him a silver quarter sovereign for his trouble. He followed after his crew, taking a glance over his shoulder at the Zarastar, who had returned to their tankards in celebration. Umra threw the door open, a rush of cold air hitting his face, and stepped out into the Anaris night. He found his drunken gang a few doors down. They surrounded a young Evanese woman, her back forced up against the rough wooden facade of the building, her fear-widened eyes darting between the slobbering half-orcs. Umra drew his men off with a whistle. The woman ran away down the street in the opposite direction, and the bloodbound trudged toward the camp they'd set up in a patch of woods, just outside the city's east gate. The night was cold, despite it being well into the planting season. The crisp air revived Umra's senses after the stale, humid warmth of the tavern. "I'll take first watch," Umra said, as they walked beneath the arch of the city gate. "You men sleep off that Forestier ale. Drog and I will be heading back into Anaris in the morning to make our case before Lord Morrow. I hope we'll have work shortly." It had been some time since they'd put metal to flesh, and they were all too ready to jump back into the fray. Umra grimaced, waved them off, and the bloodbound stumbled about in a drunken effort to ready their camp for the night. As the men slept, Umra sat beside the dwindling fire, eating a bit of rabbit left over from their midday meal. His thoughts wandered to his father, as they often did when he wasn't sure of the path forward. It seemed a lifetime since his father had been slaughtered at the hands of the Tukdari horde that swept through his village all those years ago. "Sorry to bother you, Umra," Gori said, taking a seat beside him at the fire. "I was having trouble sleeping, so I figured I might as well keep watch with you." "Not a bother, Gori. Is there something on your mind that keeps you up?" "Nothing specific. My mind just races at times." "I know that feeling all too well. You are welcome to join me." "Thank you." Gori warmed his hands. "Were you in the middle of something? You seemed pensive." "No, I was just thinking about my father." "You've never spoken of your family before. Is he still with us?" "No. I was 4 when our village in Orit Skag was attacked by Tukdari barbarians. My father, Yargol was his name, hid me in the trunk of a dead tree before running out to meet his doom, in the form of a Goliath's battle-axe. He told me not to make a sound until he returned. I sat, motionless, in the base of this dark tree trunk, listening to the shrill sounds of battle for the first time. I can remember the clang of metal and the sickening crunch of bone. The screams of the stricken and the celebratory chants of the barbarian horde are as fresh in my mind as if their victory were yesterday. The smell of decay, of fire, and burning flesh are still ripe. As quickly as the barbarians arrived, they left, taking with them the meager amount of wealth and material possessions my orc clan possessed, as well as every woman they could kidnap, including my mother, Jocelyn. I sat in that tree for days, waiting for my father to come for me, but he never did. Hunger set in, and eventually it drove me from the tree. The worms and centipedes inhabiting its musty, hollow core were not enough to sustain me. I kicked a hole through the rotting wood and was awestruck by the destruction. My village had been razed to the ground and my entire clan slaughtered. Nothing was left but scorched earth and corpses. I found my father's severed head on a pike, a statement to anyone considering reprisal. With nothing but the clothes on my back and the hilt of a broken sword I took from my elder cousin's charred remains, I left Gosher Uk and made my way west, away from the direction the barbarians traveled. I wandered into the areas of Orat Skag with which I was unfamiliar. The barren landscape, ubiquitous throughout the orc homeland, offered me little in the way of markers by which I could determine my path. I survived on whatever I was lucky enough to forage, and the modicum of dank water the land gave. Eventually, I approached the edge of Wicked's Pass. My parents always told me stories about the dangers that resided within that old hemlock forest, and under normal circumstances, I would not have dared enter such a wild place on my own. But the promise of plentiful food and fresh water drove me forward. I traveled by day, unsuccessfully hunting squirrels, rabbits, and birds with a makeshift sling. Before nightfall, I would find an empty burrow or tree trunk and spend the dark hours listening to the sounds of ogres, wolves, and the other wretched creatures that called the forest home. One night, under a full moon, an ogre used the burrow in which I was hiding to defecate. As hard as I tried, I could not stay silent, and the dumb beast tore into the hole with reckless abandon, sending dirt and feces flying everywhere. I scrambled to escape the ogre's grasp. The beast barreled after me, grabbing me by the ankle and lifting me to its putrid mouth. As it did so, I grabbed the broken hilt and plunged the shard deep into the ogre's neck, severing a major artery. The creature dropped me and clutched its throat. Reeling in pain, the beast took a furious swipe at me, but I rolled just out of reach. With one last howl, the ogre fell to the ground, lifeless. I ran. I ran through the night, tripping over brambles and scraping against rocks. By daybreak, I exited the forest and collapsed from exhaustion. It was there that a monk from Travesty happened to stumble across my exhausted body and nursed me back to health in the confines of the temple monastery. He was a loving man by the name of Ivory Lapping, and he raised me as his own child from that day forward. "That is truly an amazing story," Gori said, his gaze fixed on Umra. "Did you ever return?" "No. That life is a distant memory. You men are my family now. There's no need to go back." Gori nodded. The two men sat together through the first part of the night as a thick fog rolled into the camp. After a few hours, Grog awoke for his shift on watch. "Glad to see you had some company, Umra," he said, pouring himself some water from his water skin. "Yes, Gori joining me was a pleasant surprise," Umra said, "but now I must get some sleep." He yawned, patting Gori on the shoulder as he stood. Taking his leave, Umra went to his bedroll and closed his eyes, as Drog threw a log on the fire, sending a plume of embers into the air. Chapter 2. There was little need for faith in the gods, for they had receded, and Modig Farin filled the void they left. With mankind's faith split, the magic of old all but disappeared from Tiverial. The Gatekeeper's Abridged History of Tiverial, Volume 3, Chapter 2. Discovered at the private library of Solana Marwyn, the month of Vasa, 889 AT. Umra arose to the early morning smell of fox roasting over the roaring fire. He was greeted eagerly by his loyal men, who seemed no worse for wear because of last night's festivities. He brushed the morning dew from his leathers and sat with his men to eat and warm his tired body. As the sun rose through the woods, Umra stood, still chewing. "Drog, you and I will head into Anaris for supplies, and hopefully some direction regarding Lord Morrow's contract," Umra said, wiping his face on his sleeve. "He is expected to post his contract today, and I want to be among the first to argue our case for the reward. The rest of you should be prepared to move out at a moment's notice. Weapons readied, peace made." The men nodded and returned to their breakfasts. Umra and Drog gathered their gear and walked back toward Anaris. "What did you think of that group of Zerostar?" Drog asked, as they crossed into the city. "I didn't take much notice of them, other than to realize they were in no mood for Thurg's antics," Umra said. "I couldn't allow that to go any further and risk our chance at getting the contract." "Do you honestly think we have a chance?" "I don't even know if they will let us into the inner district," Umra said, hanging his head. "If we can get before Morrow, I'd like to think he would hear us out." "You give him too much credit, Umra," Drog said. "I know he's not a pureblood, but he may as well be with his station. He won't bestow an important contract on the likes of us. It's you who don't give us enough credit. We are every bit as capable as any of the other crews here. In fact, I would put us up against any and all of Evelium," Umra said. "Yes, but we don't have the right color skin for the job." Drog held out his arms and showed Umra the olive-green skin that peeked out between his studded bracers and leather cuirass as an unnecessary reminder. "And last I checked, tusks were not a big selling point. Maybe you're right, but there are a few people that can see beyond that. They're just few and far between," Umra said. "And they seem to get further between the more money and power they have." Anaris was waking up. Dew gathered on the thatched rooftops and dripped into puddles at the side of the compacted dirt roads. Dogs lapped at the water and dodged the merchants, who shooed them away in preparation to open for business. With broom in hand, a portly shopkeeper threw open the door to his store and performed this ritual with zeal. A particularly disheveled dog spun from the broom's path and crashed into Umra's strong legs, yelped, and ran off into an adjacent alley. "Good morning, friend," Umra said, greeting the shopkeeper. The white-haired man took a step back. "Good morning, friends. How may I help you fine gentlemen today?" he asked. "We are travelers. We heard that the Honorable Espen Morrow would require some assistance. Do you know anything about such news?" Umra asked, in as approachable a tone as possible. "Sorry, friend. I know naught of his lordship's business affairs. I suppose it may have something to do with those that have gone missing over the last few months. But what do I know? I'm a simple man who runs a fine store for outdoorsmen such as yourselves. Can I interest you in a look at my wares?" Not wanting to be rude, Umra ducked under the doorway, following the shopkeeper, and entered the tidy little shop while Drog waited outside. "Gone missing, you say?" Umra asked. "Yes. I've only heard rumors and gossip from my customers. I'm best known for my mace craftsmanship, but people come to me for all types of provisions," the man said, encouraging Umra to handle a fine silver mace. "One of my best pieces yet, if you don't mind me saying." "I agree," Umra said, impressed with the quality of the work. "Well balanced and absolutely stunning. I have a friend who would very much like this. May I ask how much?" "Normally, that piece would go for 50 sovereigns, but as a first-time customer, I'm happy to part ways with the mace for 40. If you would be so kind as to share your impressions about my work as you travel." "Most fair," Umra said, rooting through his money pouch to retrieve the notes. As he strapped the mace to the side of his satchel, the shopkeeper grasped his arm. Umra looked up in surprise. "Friend, be careful what you get yourself into around Anaris. There have been some very strange goings-on around these parts recently. You seem like a good, honest man, and even though we have only known each other for a short time, I would hate to hear of any ill will coming your way," he said, his voice wavering. Rarely caught off guard, Umra paused. "Thank you. I appreciate the concern," he said. He placed 4 10-sovereign notes on the counter. "And thank you for the mace. I must be on my way." "Of course. A good day to you." "And you as well." Umra excused himself. Outside, Umra found Drog waiting near the door of the shop, avoiding eye contact with the passers-by that gawked at him as the town awoke. Carts filled with vegetables and other goods rolled past. Children played in the street. Umra placed his hand on Drog's shoulder. "City life isn't so bad, is it?" he asked. Drog shrugged. "All of this is a bit foreign to me." The men made their way toward the center of the town, leaving the more mundane stores and homes of the commoners' district behind. Passing through a ring of lush gardens, they entered a district where well-to-do commoners had their homes and businesses. "Could you ever imagine settling down in a city like this?" Drog asked, as they crossed a small stone bridge that spanned the first of two circular canals within the city's walls. "I'm not sure the city would have us, no matter our reputation or wealth," Umra said. A woman in a yellow embroidered dress crossed the street in an obvious attempt to avoid them. Together they walked through the business district, ignoring the disapproving glares and whispers from the wealthy folk in their fine clothes. Approaching another bridge that led to the innermost district of the city, the Lord's Manor broke into view, its bluestone tower rising above the cluttered horizon. "Where do you think you are going?" asked a guard, in a confrontational tone as Umra and Drog approached. "You two surely do not belong here," another guard said, crossing their steel pikes to block the path. Umra sized them up. The men were adorned in shining chainmail armor, covered by green tunics with gold lions emblazoned on their chests. Besides their pikes, each man was armed with a shield which matched their tunic and a finely crafted short sword at their waist. Their helmets were undented and their boots unsoiled. These men had never seen battle. Refocusing on his goal, Umra answered as respectfully as possible. "My guards of Anaris, we come in search of work at the bequest of his lordship, Espen Moro. Have you any news?" Looking down upon the half-orcs from the apex of the bridge, the first guard replied with a sneer, "I have no news for the likes of you, orc. I suggest you turn back and relieve your mind of such aspirations as communing with his lordship." Now pointing his pike at Umra, the guard poked at his chest. "Hurry on your way, then." Drog stepped forward, gripping his axe, but Umra put his arm out, stopping him. "As you wish," Umra said. Nudging Drog with his elbow, the half-orcs turned and walked away. Umra and Drog found their way back to the candlelit tavern, where they ate a small lunch of chicken stew. The tavern was remarkably peaceful when compared to the night before, though unable to rid itself of the smell of stale beer and sweat. Umra, disgusted with his failure at procuring the contract, hung his head. Seeing Drog's morale fade, he snapped himself out of his self-pity. "If not this contract, then the next," Umra said, breaking the silence. "Of course," Drog said. "I was hoping we would at least get to make our case before Lord Moro." Umra shook his head. The tavern door swung open, the ring of its chimes interrupting their conversation. A Forestier man walked in and marched directly to a post in the center of the room. He unfurled a small leaflet and nailed it to the post, and left as briskly as he entered. Umra walked over to get a closer look. The leaflet was absurdly low for a man of his stature. Trying to crouch down to read the note, he huffed and tore it from the post. As he straightened himself, he read, "By the will of his lordship Espen Moro, Anaris is in need of a hero. Any who deems himself worthy should present his case to the Lord directly. At Town Hall, this day, at high sun." A smile cracked Umra's sullen facade. High sun was less than an hour away. Surely there would not be too much competition on such short notice. "Time to give getting an audience with Lord Moro another try, mate," he said, sliding the now disheveled paper across the table as he sat down. Drog read and nodded in agreement. "The note clearly says any," Drog said. "Maybe this is the key to getting before Moro. Shall we go back and get the others and show our true strength? I think it best that just you and I go. After last night, the town knows there are 6 of us about. No need to attract further attention. Moro might just appreciate us being tactful in such a manner," Umra said. "But why should we hide our numbers? Are we not to look as strong as possible to win the contract?" Drog asked. "No," Umra said, after a moment of contemplation. "If we all go before Lord Moro and his council, I think we risk scaring them off, and will only lessen our chances of success. Someday, those of us willing to risk our lives for the meek will be paid the respect we are due, regardless of race. Today is not that day." Drog nodded. "When shall these days end?" he asked. "Not soon enough." Reaching across the table and putting his hand on Drog's shoulder, Umra offered some solace. Through our actions, not our lineage, do we achieve greatness. Let's go and win this contract, and have the Bloodbound be known as great champions of Anaris. They stood and paid for their meal. Leaving the tavern, Umra allowed himself to wonder if the guards would let them pass into the central districts of the city. He hoped their possession of the note would be enough to gain them access. Returning to the inner bridge, Umra's heart raced in anticipation of once again confronting the guards who had dismissed him earlier. When he did not recognize the two guards now standing watch, he sighed in relief and approached without hesitation. "Good day, gentle guards of Anaris." He greeted the two men, who crossed their pikes upon seeing two half-orcs approach. "We seek an audience with his lordship Espen Moro regarding his charge." Umra held the paper up for the guards to see. Without making a sound, or even a cursory glance, the guards raised their pikes, and Umra and Drog passed into the innermost ring of Anaris. The inner district was truly a sight to behold for two half-orcs who had spent precious little time in such refined settings. Like the business district, the streets were paved with cobblestones rather than dirt, but here the architecture was more ornate, with slate roofs replacing wood on the large bluestone buildings that were ubiquitous throughout. The people were dressed in aristocratic clothes and greeted each other with pleasantries as they passed on the streets. The shops were bustling, and the gardens teemed with exotic plantings from all over Evelium. Entering the very center of Anaris, the immense town hall and Lord's Manor became visible. The complex was a collection of large bluestone buildings with spires at each corner, archers keeping watch on the parapets high above. Other guards, armed with pikes and short swords, patrolled the property on both sides of the 8-foot-high bluestone wall that enclosed it and the Lord's Manor. With only one entrance at the south, the compound was secure. "Drog, we have never aimed so high for a contract," Umra acknowledged. "We will be making our case before Lord Moro and his wife, who is the king's sister, and likely several other members of Anaris' council. We are already at a disadvantage, so we must be convincing that we are a decidedly better alternative to all of the other options." "I have faith in you, Umra," Drog replied. Chapter 3. Messerith lay slain, the last of his kind. It was I who tamed these wild lands, so that Evelium could once again belong to man. Telsidor's Missives. Diary entry dated 8th of Riet, 6 AF. Unearthed from the ruins of Anaris, month of Emin, 1156 AT. Grandmaster Evron Alabaster stood upon the pedestal overlooking the large square room that was the inner sanctum of the Brothers of Resurrection. Torches cast the rough-hewn sandstone walls in an uneven light from the pillars upon which they were mounted. The large circular pit at the center of the room lay empty, awaiting the contents of several barrels lining the far wall. Everything was in order. Evron inhaled, breathing in the stale, damp air of the underground sanctum, and gripped the metallic rune on the podium before him in both hands. It glowed red, underlighting him so his fair ebony skin was colored to match his hooded cloak. A solitary door off to his right ground open, 30 figures in black robes, with red inverted crosses on the chest, entering the room in a single column and encircling the circular pit. They clasped hands and bowed their hooded heads. Evron raised his hands in the air. "Brothers, we gather here on this hallowed day to begin the feeding of our portal to Pragaris. Nor has wallowed long enough in its hells, and demands that we return him to Tiveriel, so he may assume his rightful place as our god king." The brothers began to chant, the monotonous chorus echoing through the sanctum. Evron placed his hands back on either side of Nor's ancient rune. He stared down at its message, engraved in the long-since-forgotten hieroglyphs of the gods, and smiled. "Please bring forth our first offering to the portal." Within the circle at the opposite edge of the pit, 4 men removed the top from a large wooden barrel, exposing the dark liquid within. With the chanting urging them on, the men tipped the barrel toward the pit and spilled its contents upon the dry stone floor below, releasing a ferrous odor into the room. Evron clasped his hands, putting an end to the chanting. "Nearly 2 millennia ago, Nor planted this rune here beneath the Lazarus woods, pleading for salvation. With this first contribution to the portal of Pragaris, we have taken an important step to realize our god's prophecy, he said. Once the blood of 12,000 souls fills the pit, and the reaping moon reaches its peak, the portal shall open, and Nor will take his rightful place as the uncontested ruler of Evelium and all of Tiveriel. The brothers cheered, and Everon raised his hands to quiet them. Now is not a time of celebration, however, but rather a time to double our efforts, to sharpen our focus, to spread our influence throughout every town in Evelium. Through only our selfless efforts can the world be saved from the decadence of the Forenian age. Through only our success may it be recast according to Nor's vision. His words were met with a unified shout of support. Then, silence. Then the chant resumed. The Brothers of Resurrection released each other's hands and stepped back from the precipice of the pit. Barrel after barrel arrived at the pit's edge, their tops removed, and sanguineous contents poured within. As the blood covered the floor of the pit in its entirety, evenly spaced vents in the stone floor released air, causing the fluid to bubble as if in a slow, preternatural boil. Now, go forth, blend in among the masses, and harvest the vital fluids our god requires to end his banishment in the hells of Pragaris. Be careful, and let no one know our purpose. By Nor's will. By Nor's will, the brothers said in unison. The sole entrance to the sanctum unlocked, with the sound of metal grating against stone revealing the adjoining sanctuary. The brothers filed out of the sanctum, each taking a turn to bow in reverence as they passed the pedestal where the glowing runes sat. Everon was last to leave the inner sanctum, having remained behind in prayer. After the rest of the group left the sanctuary, he walked over and stood in front of a large statue of Nor in the very center of the large, oval room. Evron removed his hood and tied his long blonde hair into a single plait. He stared at the demon god's sinuous form. The gnarled horns, the mouth with fangs bared, the razor-sharp claws on his hands and feet, and the tattered wings were all just as the Tome of Mystics had described. Where others saw fear in this image, Evron Alabaster saw beauty and the promise of a new future. For generations, we have dedicated ourselves to decoding your rune. Now that we have unlocked the secrets of your return, all has been set in motion. I trust our devotion shall be rewarded. I hope you are proud of the following we have prepared for you. He bowed solemnly, raised his hood, and left the room through another door, which emptied into a large, sparsely lit tunnel, where a lone chestnut horse waited for him in a side room fashioned into a stable. The ride back to Meriden would take nearly 2 hours at a healthy trot. Evron did not mind, however, as the trip gave him time to think of all that yet needed to be done to ensure the resurrection of Nor. Everything was in place, but so much still hung in the balance. He rode through the tunnel his forefathers had labored to construct over the ages, thinking as he did of the efforts the Brotherhood made to keep their sanctuary, and Nor's rune, hidden from the rest of Evelium. He breathed deeply, cherishing the damp, musty air that hung within the passage, which he had grown to prefer to the fresh air above. Leaving the sanctuary to resume his mundane duties in Meriden always left him feeling hollow. The sanctuary had become his one true home. At the end of the tunnel, there was another subterranean stable, and beyond it a heavy reinforced oak door. He dismounted from his horse and led it into the final empty stall with a pat on its left shoulder. He then walked to the other side of the room, removed his robe, folded it neatly, and placed it in an iron chest along the wall. He walked out of the door, carefully closing it behind him, and emerged in the basement of the Meriden Gatekeeper's Lodge. "Good evening, Grandmaster. I trust your return trip was uneventful." A slight, ebony-haired man greeted him from the desk at the center of the room. There was Ebenese in his lineage, as witnessed by his angular face and fair skin, but he was not pureblood. "Quite, brother. Any news?" Evron poured himself a glass of wine from a decanter, sitting at the center of a sturdy rectangular table, along the wall to the right of the door through which he'd entered.
We received word from Master Mantes that he has sent another shipment north, the man said, flashing a proud smile. He is most prolific. What a pleasant surprise he has been, Evron praised, swirling the deep red wine in his glass before savoring his first taste. See to it I am notified when each shipment arrives. I would like to personally oversee their delivery to the temple. As you wish, Grand Master. Will you be joining the others upstairs this evening? Lorekeeper Scarth is expected to be in attendance after supper. I suppose I should.
Evron sighed.
We cannot have Lorekeeper Scarth getting bored and finding his way to the basement. I should think not, Grand Master. With so much at stake, it would be a travesty for him to become aware of what is going on, right under his nose, the man scoffed. He would find his way to being one of the 12,000 bloody souls, should he?
Evron paused.
With any luck, he may count himself among them, regardless, before this is all over. I do not know if he is as insensible as he lets on, or if he knows better than to interfere in the true business of the gatekeepers, and chooses to continue his involvement in the Order for political favor,
Evron said, as he ambled to the stairs at the far side of the room. He paused, took a moment to assure himself that he was presentable. He ran his hands over his hair and inspected his fine, embroidered green coat. Satisfied that all was in order, he made his way up to the lodge, which was already humming with activity. The exuberance of the room hit him full on as soon as he entered. Men were gambling, arm wrestling, and boasting about their business ventures over pints of Barnswallow's Sowing Moon Ale. Rays of late afternoon sun filtered through the smoke-filled air from the windows along the western side of the room. Scantily dressed waitresses delivered trays of food and drink about the room, skirting the far too common stray hand of the lodge's membership. Evron waded into the morass, slipping sideways through the crowd, his gaze fixed on the floor.
Grand Master,
a well-dressed Iminti man said, extending his hand.
Wonderful seeing you this afternoon. Such a rare occurrence these days. Will you be joining us tonight?
I plan to, brother, yes.
Evron shook the man's hand.
But I have work to see to if I am going to be able to join tonight's dinner on time. Please excuse me.
Of course. Tonight, then.
Evron released the man's hand, hurried up the stairs where there was a long hallway lined with private rooms on either side, used for business meetings and dalliances alike. At the end of the hall was his office, the door ajar. Shutting his office door behind him, there was a sense of relief as he sat behind his large mahogany desk. A pile of long-neglected papers lay stacked upon its surface. His focus had been singular for so long. His responsibilities as Grand Master had gone untended in favor of his leadership of the Brotherhood of Resurrection. Turning to the window, he gazed out over Meriden and upon the Lazarus Woods.
It will not be long now, Evelium. The reign of Nor approaches, he whispered,
shutting his eyes for a much-needed. Chapter 4.
I have convinced the Evanese to welcome all but the least palatable of the lesser races into our new society.
The collected letters of Modig Farin. Letter to Doduf Sepran, dated 21st of Lusta, 2 AF. Unearthed from the ruins of Vanyarain, month of Aachen, 1301 AT. The guards stepped aside, granting Umra and Drog access to the compound. Umra paused to straighten his leathers, his left hand coming to rest on the blue pouch on his belt, and then opened the great, iron-reinforced oak doors to the main parlor of the town hall. The soft light of flickering candles lit the large stone room. The heads of fantastic creatures from the far reaches of Evelium were mounted between tapestries that lined the walls. An ornate, deer-antler chandelier hung from the raftered ceiling above a large wooden table at the far end of the room. At the table sat a group of individuals that spoke among themselves in a restrained whisper, which echoed unintelligibly throughout the chamber. Awaiting their attention were 3 distinct parties of a half-dozen or so members, all heavily armed. Umra and Drog approached, the temple bells ringing in the distance, welcoming High Sun. 2 guards barred the door, closing the meeting off to the outside world behind them. The reverberation of the final bell still hanging in the air, a guard stepped in front of the table and slammed his pike on the stone floor, calling the chamber's attention to the council members.
I present his lordship, Espen Moro, and the noble council of Anaris.
The four crews stood at attention as a tall, dark-skinned man arose from his seat at the table. He wore a light blue coat trimmed with gold, buttoned high to his neckline. Upon his head rested a modest gold circlet, identifying him as a member of the Farine family.
Welcome all. I am Espen Moro, Lord of Anaris. I thank you all for heeding my call to action. Before we begin our conversation regarding the contract I hope to release today, please let me introduce the members of my council. To my right, as always, I have the pleasure of introducing my wife and chief counsel, Lady Genta Avret, sister of the king,
Lord Moro said, bowing to the beautiful, fair-skinned Evanese woman beside him at the table. She stood, nodded to her company, her long emerald-green gown flowing. Her blonde hair ran neatly down the length of her back. The entire room bowed in response, holding their genuflection until she retook her seat at the table.
To Lady Avret's right is Malthus Nofelt, Provost of the University of Antiquities.
Lord Moro motioned to a human man with porcelain-white skin, dark eyes, and angular features, who remained seated, gesturing a small bow toward the crowd. He wore fine, ashen robes, identifying him as an academic, one of the most revered professions in Evelium. There was little more precious to the Farine dynasty than the pursuit of intellect, and the proper recording of their historic rise to power and successful rule over the largest kingdom in all of Tiverial.
Next to Professor Nofelt is His Holiness, Balrus Silentred, Anaris' High Priest,
Lord Moro said. Balrus surveyed the room as he was introduced, until his gaze landed on Umra. Balrus's stare was transfixed, as though he were seeing a ghost. His sapphire cloak hung loosely on his thin frame. He was a pureblood and hardly showed his age of 300 years, with a head of dark hair and barely an age line to be seen. He stood and bowed to those gathered, all the while keeping his gaze trained on Umra and Drog.
Beside His Holiness is Talain Serig, our chief constable,
a stern-looking Zeristar, with a deep scar on his neck that rose above the high collar of his green tunic, nodded to the room with a grunt. His auburn hair was drawn back into an intricate braid, and he wore a thick beard that was impeccably groomed. He looked down upon the room over a crooked nose, a stern frown chiseled on his face.
To my immediate left is Anaris' Treasury Secretary, Balin Bucalo,
a dark-complexioned man with a tall, athletic build and dressed in a fine purple silk suit stood and took a grandiose bow.
And last, but by no means least, we have Nathaniel Barnswallow, head of the Merchants' Guild, brewmaster of Barnswallow's Ales, and proprietor of the Barnswallow's Nest, Lord Moro said, concluding his introductions. Nathaniel Barnswallow was the Forestier man they had seen earlier that day, posting the note at the candlelit tavern. He stood in his chair.
"Good day, my fine champions," he said,
holding his arms out wide to the groups gathered before the council.
"We are most privileged to be in your company."
He gave a deep bow and returned to his seat. The introductions concluded. Balrus Silentred stood and approached Lord Moro. He cupped his hand over his mouth and whispered in Lord Moro's ear. Lord Moro nodded and turned his attention back to the mercenaries.
We thank you all for coming. In many cases, a great distance at our request, Lord Moro said. Your fealty shall be noted and shared with King Arving at once. Despite our intentions of extending a private audience with this council to all that responded to our call, some unexpected news has presented itself, which has brought our attention to the fore. At Lord Silentred's request, we have decided that Sir Umra the Peacebreaker and his group the Bloodbound shall be rewarded the contract. I bid the rest of you well.
Lord Moro!
A strapping man in drab leathers and crossed scimitars on his back interjected, stepping forward from one of the mercenary groups.
I must object. How can you trust the safety of Anaris to a band of orcs? And on what basis?
Lord Moro's glare darted to the man.
On the basis that doing so pleases the Council of Anaris. It sounds as though you question my judgment.
Not at all, Lord Morrow. The man recoiled. My apologies for the outburst. I was just taken aback at the haste of the decision against my fine group's employ. We didn't even have the opportunity to make our case before the council.
I understand your frustration, but the decision has been rendered. Thank you for your time.
The other three parties made their way out of town hall, complaining to each other under their breath. Umra's mind raced, amazed at what just happened. He turned to Drog, questioning the events, at which Drog merely shrugged and flashed a diminutive smile at the outcome.
Sir Peacebreaker?
Lord Morrow beckoned, breaking the silence.
Please join us at the table so that we may proceed with the business at hand.
Lord Morrow sat beside his wife and gestured toward a large dark wood chair with a supple green cushion directly across from the table. Nathaniel Barnswallow welcomed Drog to join him at the end of the table.
Thank you, Lord Morrow. Members of the council,
Umra said, taking his seat.
Drog and I appreciate your vote of confidence in our group to fulfill your contract, and we're ready to begin presently. I must say, however, that I'm curious as to how you arrived at your decision so quickly. Lord Silentred said he knew of you, and that you and your organization were beyond reproach. When a man as esteemed as Lord Silentred speaks in such terms, I tend to listen,
Lord Morrow said. Umra looked over to Balrus Silentred, who flashed a friendly but unfamiliar smile.
Sir Peacebreaker, Anaris is seemingly under attack,
Lord Morrow said, wasting no time. Espen Morrow did not come off as one prone to exaggeration, but Umra had a hard time understanding what exactly he meant. Having been in the area for nearly 2 days, he had not witnessed as much as a mild disturbance, other than those caused by his own party.
Over the last few months, several citizens of and visitors to Anaris, including Lord Barnswallow's younger brother, Nicholas, have gone missing along Ember's Way, just north of the city limits. We are afraid the disappearances are the work of an agent of Red Ulest. If this name has meaning to you, it does, your lordship. We've spent some time in Winterash and are familiar with his claim to the throne.
But what would an agent of Uleth's be doing south of the Elothrol Mountains?
Would that not be an infraction upon the Treaty of the Fracture? Yes, it would, Lord Morrow said. May I also assume you are aware the Treaty of the Fracture has been strictly enforced for 2 generations of the Farine dynasty, and any such breach would ensure civil war? I understand, my lord. Delightful, Lord Morrow said. I was afraid the severity of this situation would be lost upon you. At the very least, Sir Peacebreaker, we need to understand what is going on along Ember's Way. Ideally, however, you and the Bloodbound would rid us of this problem. With prejudice. I assure you we are up to any challenge we find in those woods. That is, if you should so please.
Umra paused and waited on the council's formal decision. Lord Morrow turned to each member of the council, each of whom nodded. Lord Morrow stood and placed his hands on the table.
Let the record show that the Council of Anaris has entered into an official contract with Sir Umra the Peacebreaker, stating the council will pay 5,000 sovereigns to Sir Peacebreaker to be divided among his party as he sees fit, in exchange for the investigation and elimination of the previously described threat to the fair city of Anaris. Payment shall be remitted in the form of a 10% advance for expenses and 90% upon satisfactory completion of the contract.
Lord Morrow turned to Umra and motioned him to rise. As Umra stood, Lord Morrow extended his hand. Umra welcomed the gesture, and the men shook hands in agreement of the terms. Treasurer Bukalo approached and handed Umra a green velvet billfold. 500 sovereign notes for your expenses, Sir Peacebreaker. Good luck. Umra accepted the billfold and placed it in his satchel.
Thank you, Lord Bukalo, he said. If it pleases the council, I would like to take our leave and get started immediately. My men are ready and waiting for my return. By all means, Lord Morrow said.
Drog stood and joined Umra before the council. They bowed and turned toward the door. Nearing the door, Balrus Silentred caught up to them from behind.
Sir Peacebreaker, may I trouble you for a moment? He asked.
Umra motioned for Drog to give him and the priest a moment to themselves.
Sorry to bother you, Balrus said. You are from Travesty, are you not?
Umra's throat tightened. butterflies fluttering in his stomach.
Not originally, Your Holiness, but I did live in travesty for many years during my childhood and adolescence. That was a long time ago, however. Is that somehow our connection?
A long time.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.